Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode has been brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum to be held on November 7th and 8th of 2022 in Verona, Italy. This year will be an exclusively in-person edition. The main theme of the event will be all-round wine communication. Tickets are on sale now, so for more information, please visit us at winetowine.net.
Hello, everybody. My name is Polly Hammond, and you are listening to Uncorked, the Italian wine podcast series about all things marketing and communication. Join me each week for candid conversations with experts from within and beyond the wine world as we explore what it takes to build a profitable business in today's constantly shifting environment. In this episode, we welcome Steph Duboudin, an absolute powerhouse in Australasian wine marketing. With a wine career spanning over 20 years, Steph has been the Australia-New Zealand manager for Wine Intelligence and Decanter, judge of the Wine Communicators of the Year award for 5 years running, and chair of Wine Victoria. Today, Steph shares her extensive knowledge on the state of Australian wine while we dive into my favorite topic, the future of wine marketing. Let's get into it. All right. Steph, welcome. Thank you so much for jumping on. I know it's been one hell of a week for you there in Oz, but I'm glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Polly. Good to be here.
So you and I spent a couple weeks ago, I guess it was a couple weeks at this point, we were at the Wine Industry Impact Conference. I'm always going to get that wrong, for WISA. And I wanted a chance to catch up with you because not only are you the chair for Wine Victoria, but you have a 2-decade-long illustrious career in wine insights, in analytics. You've worked for Wine Intelligence and Decanter. And I thought it would be a really nice opportunity to kind of get your feel on what we heard at the conference and what we think is going on in Oz and New Zealand and beyond.
Sure. Okay. No, it was great. And it was so good to meet you at the conference. And I think a lot of people felt that it was there was such a good vibe at that conference. And I don't mean that, other conferences don't, but I think firstly, obviously we haven't had heaps of, sort of large scale events since COVID times. And obviously we here in Victoria had a lot of lockdowns, but so it was great for that part of things. But I also kind of feel that I think there was a great lineup of speakers, and the content that was being focused on was very sort of innovative, forward focusing in a way. I mean, the topic was how to future-proof your wine business. And as Jeremy, the host, said at the end, there wasn't once a discussion about wine quality because we kind of know how to do that. Been doing that for a really long time, but there was a lot on innovations and ecomm, NOLO and a whole heap of other things, which was great.
Well, I totally agree with you on that. A couple things that stood out to me. One, the Australian audience came prepared to be really engaged, which was just fabulous. And the other thing was that I remember going to conferences years back and trying to talk with people about digital and e-commerce and, understanding our consumers and the things that are so commonplace now. And it was just nothing, like glazed over eyes staring at me like, no, what are these things that you're speaking of? It's all magic. And in terms of the content that you saw, and very specifically to what's happening in Australia, let's just back up a minute. And because not everybody who's listening was at the conference with us. What were some of the challenges that you have felt, personally in the work that you've done in the region, or that came up in the conference that are the biggest challenges Australia is going to have going forward in maybe like the next 5 years? Obviously, China being organic.
Yeah. I mean, I think China's most definitely number one. It's a huge deficit. The export market that's just been wiped off there for that channel, and obviously, so very much looking for other markets to of where that wine can go. Both obviously export and domestic. But I think probably what COVID has done too, and where things and I totally agree with you about what you were saying before. It was always quite a struggle in terms of getting people on board and in sort of marketing technology innovations, digital technology innovations to use in your business. And that's, I think what's happened during COVID is, we still had a lot of wineries here in Australia that didn't have online e-commerce stores on their website. Plenty that did, but there was still quite a lot that didn't. So, everyone had to quickly upskill in that area. And obviously the direct-to-consumer channel is so profitable. It's a really high margin. So it has really put attention on really being able to drive that more and what you can do in that space to really, sell more direct to the consumer, whether it be from your cellar door, but mainly from that e-commerce side of things.
So I have a question about that. I mean, you do a ton of work in strategy building and resource building through your business, which is Food and Wine Insights. I noticed that digital is a bit of a mixed bag in the sense that we're told it should be really easy, whack a website up, you do all of these things. But actually the resourcing and the knowledge resourcing is really difficult. Are you finding that wine brands whom you work with are more, they're more interested in bringing digital into the strategy from the very beginning? Or have we just not reached that point yet?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it was like just a bit of an add-on before, and particularly pre-COVID. And we'd look at e-commerce wine sales, and it was always nearly just trying to get to double digits. And it was like, when is that tipping point going to happen? Which will then put a bit more, sort of focus on it. And I think that is really elevated in terms of the priorities within a business, that it's, that it's a core one to focus on. But I think it definitely is, massive skill shortages at the moment. So it's really hard to get good staff anyway. But then, a lot of businesses that we're talking about, a lot of wineries, small ones, they might have one person that's doing about 3 different jobs and trying to cover off a lot of different areas. So, and e-com and digital becomes one of theirs, as well as maybe they're the sales manager and things like that. So without doubt, it definitely takes time to understand what you're doing in the space, and particularly if you've got websites that, a little bit hard. Some websites, platforms are much easier to use than others. I sort of have a bit of a bugbear too in the wine industry. I don't know why there's a belief that you have to use a proprietary wine sort of focused system. There is nothing different about a wine club to a loyalty program. So it's not, you know what I mean? There's no sort of hidden science as to what we're doing compared to other e-commerce in general. So I just think there's so many good applications off the shelf ready to go, like a Shopify or things like that, instead of having to invest in a specific wine focused platform. That might be controversial.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, it's funny. I'm happy to talk about that. We noticed that the biggest problem to that particular adoption is our belief in a traditional wine club model. Like, if you're like, oh, I need to have that wine club that it goes out like 6 bottles every quarter and I want a choice, you can customize it and all of this. Like, that's actually a huge challenge for some of the platforms. But brands, and we see this on Shopify, I remember that Empathy Wines years ago was one of the first ones who rolled it out. Brands that are willing to completely rethink how we sell our subscription models. And like you talk about, our loyalty points and all of that. Yeah, there are a lot of options out there. I think it goes all the way back to just what we think, how we think wine sells.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am curious because you've done so much work with data and insights over the years. I mean, that's really your bailiwick. Are you finding that wine brands are not only, buying it, paying for it? Because we always know that the data gets bought and it gets put in like a bottom drawer and nobody ever goes back to it. But
yes.
are brands, medium and small brands, actually like looking at the data, asking good questions and wanting to apply it?
Are you talking about the data on the back of a website, or are you talking about general market data?
No, I'm
about
talking
consumers?
about your general market data. Yeah. So, I mean, the kind of data that you have focused on for so long. So whether it's the wine intelligence data or whether it's your own qualitative and quantitative data through Food and Wine Insights. I know a lot of times it was only the purview of really big brands that could afford it. But are you finding that there's a greater pickup to that with small and medium-sized brands these days?
I think there's a desire, always a desire for for small to medium wineries as well to know what the latest trends are, but it is still a little bit cost prohibitive in terms of it still probably does remain the domain of some of the larger and the next rung down sort of wineries in terms of actually investing in it themselves. But I would say there's actually a tremendous amount of insights out there just in general that you can, if you've got a particular area that you want to focus on, say if it was like, no and low alcohol, that category, you can actually, Google is your friend. And obviously it's different to just, getting a full deck of insights, but there's a lot published out on the internet of latest trends of what's going on in that space. And it can certainly, insights, you're looking for a bit of a bell curve of where things are going, because obviously they can't absolutely tell you what to do. But when you assess that sort of overall trend of where things are going, that gives you, a good sort of direction in terms of what the potential could be. I remember reading an amazing report. It was by a research agency over in the US called Canvas 8. It was about 6 years ago. Heineken did a study on no alcohol. And at the time, all those findings seemed quite like completely revolutionary, that young consumers would be wanting to drink no alcohol beer. But, they were ahead of the curve. This was absolutely, the type of insights that were spot on about consumer behavior and wellness and all those sort of changes that are driving the no low. And, and that's why Heineken, so successful bringing out zero alcohol beer. But just, and I feel like now, wow, I wish I'd started something 6 years ago when I was, read that first report.
Right.
I know. But it all seemed quite, shocking at the time to think that consumers were going to be behaving like that. It seemed really different. But now, it's like a tipping point. And it's, it's the fastest growing category at Dan Murphy's, our largest liquor store. So it's really interesting. You can find some, some OK data that'll give you a bit of a direction heading about where things are going in general about particular topics. We call it secondary data. So there is quite a lot out there.
So just kind of keeping your ear to the ground and knowing where to look on that. Do you have any, beyond Google Trends, that sort of thing, do you have any go-to spaces that maybe anybody who's listening can be like, okay, is it Global Web Index? Is it, drinks business specific insights?
Yeah, drinks business is a really good one, and they will keep up some latest insights. Wine Intelligence, they will, and their International Wine and Spirits Record is another one. They'll both, post sort of like teasers that give you a bit of, examples about things. And also Mintel, which is a large global research firm, they often put out quite good reports overall. They'll be on beverage, it mightn't be specifically for wine, but even just in general kind of macro trends that are going on around the world. Because again, like obviously all those health and wellness trends, that's not just, obviously it's impacting so much of our life. It's not just wine. But, so you get those macro trends that infiltrate, across all consumers really, like the good for me, good for you sort of trend. It's not a trend really. It's probably a movement of, of consumers that are, wanting to make purchases that align with their beliefs. So, the businesses that have good sustainability practices, have good social practices, all of that. And, it's becoming, certainly with younger consumers, what they put on that in terms of importance is larger than older generations. So that again gives you insight of what's going on, and that generation's going to, only become even more important as they get older and then new generations come along as well.
Yeah, and I guess that notion also of being willing to hypothesize, to look at data and be like, okay, if we've got this coming out of, for instance, fashion and beauty, I find that there's so much interesting research that applies to alc beverages coming out of fashion and beauty or sustainable luxury. I'm quite curious because, of course, your career has spanned, the globe, quite honestly, and you're situated home now in Oz. Do you find that some markets are simply better adopters? And I'll tell you why I ask. I always felt like in New Zealand, we were surprisingly early adopters because, we're the back of beyond. If we didn't have the internet all those years ago, we weren't going to be able to get shit, right?
Yes.
So is it the kind of thing that you look at it and you're like, well, actually, our farmers in many cases are way better at adopting technology than we might think they are. Any thoughts on that?
Any on what in terms of what Australia is doing that are early adopters?
Yeah, well, Australia, but also are you like, oh, you know what? The Americans are, in fact, much slower adopters we've seen than the Australians and the Antipodeans, or the UK, they take forever. Any sort of generalities, and then we can work down from there?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting one. And I think a lot of trends, not everything, but I think a lot of consumer behavior trends with what's going on with wine do come a lot from some have come from the US, so obviously canned wines and seltzers. So I lived in New York a long time ago and I knew what a seltzer was, but I knew that trend was going on in the US before it came to Australia. Again, probably should have invested in a brand. But I did wonder, I thought, well, what will Australian wine consumers think? They don't know what seltzer is. I mean, seltzer is soda water of what we call it. So it's a word we don't even know. And it's kind of an unusual word, but that hasn't really stopped things. But that trend definitely came from the States. And I think a lot of, in general, wine consumer behaviour comes from a lot from the UK, like, rosé's been very popular here for a long time, and but that was really driven a lot by the UK coming there first. What I find really interesting is that cask wine is actually doing really well in Europe, and and I'm quite into sort of the innovations with formats, with packs and things like that. And obviously, Australia, we invented the cask, but it has different perceptions.
It came from Australia, yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see what impact that may have here, because from a sustainability point of view, cask is tremendous on that sort of side of things. But we probably have had a history of putting different quality wines in cask, which that creates a bit of a legacy issue. But, in Europe, they're putting better quality wines in smaller format. It might be like 750 ml or a 1 litre and things like that. So it might change a bit of behaviour here because, of course, the wine bottle's great, but fundamentally a wine cask is quite a sustainable packaging. So that's very interesting what's going on there. I think, with e-commerce sort of side of things, I think we're probably at pace with others at the moment, and all the sort of, even though we are quite a geographically diverse country, certainly in, being in the cities and things like that, being able to get, had a bit of an explosion of the services we can get, air alcohol delivered in a pretty quick time and things like that. And that's sort of a trend that's going on all around the world. But obviously I live in the Macedon Ranges, only 65 k's out of Melbourne. I mean, forget about getting Uber Eats or or any sort of wine delivery in one of those systems here. So that puts us at a bit of a disadvantage for sure. But
it I think makes you a good planner.
Exactly, or very friendly with my local wine shop, or I do. I mean, she actually lives just across the paddock from me, so that's quite handy. But I'm
going to jump in. I have a story about that. I had my one of my best friends, who was my neighbor, also happened to own a vineyard. This was in Auckland for years and years, and there were definitely the days that I would go and knock on her door and be like, "You want to sell me a case of wine? You want to pass me a case of wine across the fence?" You're like, "Come on, I'm out." So our naughty behaviors, admitting to those. So I actually want to talk about some of your work with Wine Communicators of the Year, if we're talking about sort of adoption and e-commerce and, how we've all evolved since March 2020. You have been a judge for years.
Yes. Yep.
What do you see changing? Like if we go back to, I think the first year was 2018. Is that correct? That you were a judge for Wine Communicators of the Year?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because certainly I think in 2020, our first year of lockdowns, and it was sort of in terms of best, PR campaigns categories in that particular one, and it was the first time really that everything had flipped and people had to, pivot. They might have had a campaign planned, and then there was large wineries, small wineries, medium, all sort of entrants in the competition, and everyone. So the budgets were very varied, but everyone had to sort of pivot from their original campaigns, and a lot of moving to Zoom tastings, but doing some pretty cool and interesting different things. I remember the one winner, they won because they actually took it to a bit of a different level just a standardized, we'll send you wines and we'll do a Zoom tasting. They actually did it was a wine and cheese tasting, but not only did you taste the cheese, you actually made the cheese.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah,
wow.
It was totally neat. It was very cool. So, they sent out all the ingredients. There was, recipes and a bit of Zooms in between to assist you with making the cheese. It was like a sort of, it was a bit like a mozzarella, which didn't take years to make the cheese or anything.
Yeah.
And at the time I just thought, I love a bit of interest, and it's all about the customer experience. And I think that was, and given what was going on, that was just fun and unique and brought things really to life. And you got to, obviously it's all about the tasting of the wine, but this just created a whole another element to it. And it was a lot of fun, and they had a great sort of consumer response from it. So that was a really standout one, as opposed to just others that were, just zipping to Zoom and things like that. But I think, as I've worked with Decanter for 6 years, I do a lot of their research and insights projects. And I know Decanter has pivoted in the UK and doing a lot of, and they're continuing to do them. So doing a lot of quite, serious wine tastings, all around the globe. And obviously they have enormous reach. So they're getting people, all around the world being able to tune in and do their tastings. And, they've got such a great, they've got a great pedigree. So it's great for the brand, but it's also great for the customer experience as well. So, I'm a big, even though everyone's had a bit of Zoom fatigue, I think in so many ways, like those examples, it's cool what you can do and reach a whole new.
Well, I mean, there are so many things after that I want to talk about. So I guess the first one, just going back to the cheese idea, something that we talk about a lot, and we really saw this with the proliferation of cocktails during the past 2 years, is that it feels like wine as a product lacks the IKEA effect, that ability of we're going to do something with it. Unless you're, literally making a spritz out of it, all we get to do is open the bottle. And even that gets argued about whether or not we're using screw caps or corks, right? That there's no part of us that's in it. So I love this idea of integrating something where, I know there have been a lot of wine and cheese tastings, but the notion that you're actually making it, because what you're going to do is you're going to walk out to the table and you're going to be so damn proud of yourself because you made the cheese and you can talk about the wine. Like, I just think that is completely brilliant. High five to whatever winery did that.
No, I agree.
I think the Zoom thing is interesting because what it really changed was how consumers feel about it. So we might be tired of Zoom because as a wine brand, I have wine brands who literally did thousands of virtual tastings, and that can be exhausting for them. But for the person sitting on the other side of the screen, they probably are not doing thousands of wine tastings, and we've got some brands who are continuing to do it and continuing to have great success because the customer has realized I can experience wine from far away. So yeah, I think, I don't know if you saw it. I think that there was a big concern when America was coming out of lockdown because there were some brands that were like, phew, we can stop all of this digital stuff and we can go back to hand selling across the tasting room bar. So just transition. One of the people who spoke at the conference was pre-record video. It was a gentleman whose name I can't remember, who was wine marketing, wine tourism marketing, something like that, in the UK. I'll find that link and add it to the show notes. And he was saying, in terms of experiences, that his hypothesis going forward is that it's going to be a hybrid event where there's some, like docent leadership walking you through it. And then there's going to be the DIY, go off on your own, follow your own path, make your own adventure.
Yes.
How does this, especially with disease risk, like we don't want people walking through the vineyards. I know you guys have dealt with phylloxera in Oz. How do we see our wine brands, our cellar doors adopting that hybridized experience?
Yeah, it's a good point. And the reality is, I've dealt with so many clients who, everyone, of course, wants more people to their cellar doors. But, look at Australia. We are really spread out. So it's, in terms of getting people to the cellar doors, it actually is just a whole new channel to expose your cellar. Hopefully then if they've never been before and you have a bit of a digital opportunity to sort of expose them to it, then they'll become a bit more brand ambassadors and get on board. And that's often what happens with, because, working in wine, we're also lucky because it's a lifestyle industry, and people, generally when people are coming out to the wineries, they're all in a great mood. They're having, they're in a relaxing time. I mean, that's why so many weddings get held at wineries. It's generally a highly positive experience. And, I can't quite remember the stats, but it's quite, it has quite a, massively positive effect on a consumer when they've been to a cellar door and had a good experience. And often they're just wanting to know, a lot of it is like wanting to tell their friends about little things that they've learnt there, whether, the winemaker told me that, this year's vintage is going to be the best one ever, or, what they've put in, a little secret about what's going on. Everyone loves to kind of be in the know a little bit and tell their friends about that. And there's proven research that when people taste a wine at a cellar door, and then they buy a case or whatever and they'll get home, and it's like often there's quite a whole emotional thing going on, and the wine might taste a bit different when you get home, and that's because of sense of place and emotion and things like that. But getting back to that kind of whole from your cellar door, I think there's great innovations that can be done from, say if it is your wine club, and people are doing this. I know Oak Ridge in Victoria, I remember seeing a couple of their videos, so it's not new, but things like this are great in terms of, okay, I'm part of their club, and instead of just getting my dozen every now and again of wine sent to me, I actually get a great looking EDM, a digital email, and it's designed really well, and it's got a quick little video of the winemaker telling me about the wines, telling me why they've chosen these wines. So, again, short and simple, doesn't need to be 10 minutes or anything like that, but just it sort of brings it to life. And, and again, whether it's footage, I hear a lot about with digital, socials and things like that, what works the best is, of course, not just pictures of wine bottles sitting on a shelf or things like that. It's like in the winery, behind the scenes, showing the grapes coming in, showing labeling happening, showing what's going on behind the scenes. I remember a winery that they were laughing to me. They had one of their biggest posts was a brown snake at the which brown snakes kill people, they're deadly. A brown snake was at the cellar door, and they were like, oh, should we put it on? And then it just went off because I'm not saying it was, maybe that's that any publicity is good publicity, but they were laughing in terms of the engagement that they had with that post was the highest that they'd ever had, because it sort of brings things to life. It builds most of the time. Well, for an example, I'm always a big one for things that can make you sort of be emotionally connected to things. So a long time ago when I was working for Co-Brand in New York, I was an Australian in my 20s living in New York, and I had 5 different brands. It was a great role. I had brands that I was looking after in Chile, in France, in the US and New Zealand. So we were launching Craggy Range, and I went out to Craggy Range, and they got me to they got me to plant a vine in a particular, single vineyard, vineyard, a really special part of Craggy Range. They had a professional photographer there, had a gold shovel, and then when I got back to New York in my desk in New York, they sent me a framed picture of my vine with a little tag around it, and it was always to give Co-Brand a special allocation of this wine, and things like that. I've had that picture
rocks.
forever. Yeah, exactly. I've had that picture forever. And even though it was co-brand's special allocation, not just mine, it was my photograph and it was my vine that I planted. Hopefully one day I'll get back to go there. But, there's a lot of different things that you can do that build connections for people and, giving them a special insight to things. I've done a lot of cellar door research and it's really funny. Been at places where, they have a million different things from sculpture park to, every art galleries to everything you can think of. But the number one thing that everyone loved the most was buying produce or buying things or eating meals in the restaurant that the food came from the property. And so, in terms of all the other elements going on besides the wine, so everything else that you could possibly do. So, it's that sort of, a lot of the time it's people from the city coming out to the country to experience the vineyard, and they, really, sort of love to get that whole sense of place and that connection to the property, which I think is fantastic.
So it's so funny. One of the things I remember years ago sitting in the conference, and a woman who was the head of the Missouri AVA, which is one of the oldest AVAs in America, actually, was saying how completely bizarre their top performing post was that they showed how to make Christmas ornaments with wine corks. And it went off. And then, talking about like we've had a client who had a picture of the winemaker holding a gecko, that had been kind of saved from a place in the winery. I think that the thing is, again, coming back to this idea that things seem very normal to us. Yes. And I talk about this all the time when I'm traveling. Nobody eats the way that we do. Nobody sees as many vineyards as we see. It's easy to become jaded to the fact that for the average consumer, this is quite glamorous and very glorious. I noticed one thing that comes up quite often in content marketing research. We go through and we do sort of the deep dive in what areas are asking what questions. And one of the questions that comes up in almost every area is, what do I wear to a winery? And we always kind of chuckle at it because it seems so self-evident what you would wear to a winery. And yet it's not. Of course, there's going to be someone out there who's like, I've never been to a winery before. How do I dress? Right? Is it fancy? Do I wear heels? God forbid, do I wear heels? So that idea, I'm a big fan of empathy, that idea of kind of putting ourselves in the customer's shoes and thinking, well, what is it like to be 22, and which I was, and going to my first ever winery. And I thought I was so posh. And just kind of moving on from that. Now, you talk about video.
Yeah.
Continue. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's a really important point. And in research and insights, I really hammer it home a lot with clients. It's like, you are not the average wine consumer. I mean, obviously they know that, but it's like, you delve down into different groups of consumer segmentation in wine consumers. Anyone that works in the industry and has been there for a while, you're not even in that chart. You know what I mean? Like, because you are so deeply connected to it. You know so much about, different varieties and, a whole host of different things. So you can't, it's very difficult to be objective about what it's like for a consumer. And I did laugh about that, about what to wear, but I have a great, it's from Wine Folly, who, have some great infographics and things with wine. And I love one, they did it a long time ago about that decision-making chart about how you choose wine. And I would often use that, when I'm talking to different audiences about it's confusing for a lot of consumers. It's intimidating still to a degree. It's intimidating going into a cellar door for a lot of people. And that brings up that what do I wear, sort of thing. So, and that's where, there's so many things that can be done to make people feel comfortable, to make them relaxed, and to kind of, break down those barriers a lot. And I think cellar doors is a really interesting one that, if you're doing what you've been doing for 10 years, you need to change. Like you can't keep having the same old model or anything like that. And, breaking up and doing things a little bit differently, whether it's, specialized little sort of tours in the cellar, in the winery, or, a whole host of different things. It's a lot better than just, doing the old model. that has been done for years.
So, with reference to exactly what you're talking about, tasting rooms, and experiences, I was so pleasantly surprised by my travels through Victoria because one, the spaces were just jam packed, young people with families. So, like on one day, I went to, let's see if I get this right. I went to Domaine Chandon, Levantine Hill, and the new St. Hubert's TW
Yes.
shared location. So three totally
beautiful properties.
different, all three beautiful, all three very different, audiences, points in the market, and all three of them completely slammed, loads of young people. I'm going to get in there, plenty of Gen Xers because we do exist as a generation. And yeah, and this notion that comes up of young people are not drinking wine did not exist in those spaces.
And well, I'm glad you had a great day too, because I know there was a lot of rain that day. Was that right?
We were very lucky to even make it there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those three properties are absolutely beautiful properties in the Yarra Valley, and but there is quite a range. There's a lot more sort of small owner operator type ones, and then sort of the mid-sized ones. So they are sort of three big banner type ones. I have been to them all. I've been to the St. Hubert's. It's only opened in the last few months, and it's beautiful. And there's so much different scope of what they're going on there, and they're going to be building a luxury hotel there, which is great. There isn't actually one in the Yarra Valley, so which is quite a gap. So that'll be a great addition. But yeah, Levantine Hill, they have helicopters landing there quite frequently, and have a lot of different elements there. And there are quite different audiences. That's great to hear about how busy it was and how young people were there, particularly on a weather with about 100 mils of rain that day.
Right, I know, and families, like the St. Hubert's location, you see families out on the grass rolling down the hill. You've got corporate photography happening in other places. I kind of want to circle back around to the video thing that you're talking about. I am such a huge advocate of video for exactly some of the things that you brought up. This idea of, show, don't tell. We don't have to write down an FAQ for how you dress at a winery if you've got great video of your winemakers and showing what they're in, or you're interviewing the people who are present in the winery. And so much opportunity for video. It's really, really hard to convince people to go there. Are you having any luck with that?
Yeah, I think. Well, I must say I'm a big fan of video, but then I'm like I shy away from doing it myself. So I get
Podcasts
why people
are great.
I get why people have concerns about it, but no, it's. I mean, there was a presentation at the conference. It was incredible with being able to. I should remember off the top of my head the guy from New Zealand. Was that Sean?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was an amazing one. Incredible drone footage. And it was for export orientated, and just because the scenery was absolutely fantastic. And it was a short video, but it was just short, sharp, simple little, headlines coming up, and just gave you an amazing sense of place, and it took you there. And I think that's the power of video. And again, lives, doing Instagram lives and things like that, that's so powerful and easy to do, as well as, those sort of full production videos. So yeah, and it's knowing, getting back to what we were talking about, that, we because we work so closely in it, you sort of forget that for a lot of people it's, this is quite a treat. It's an amazing experience to go out to a winery, and, all those three wineries that you mentioned in the Yarra Valley, beautiful properties. Everyone that goes out there no doubt feels quite special when they're out there. And, and there's a lot to show off there. So there's so much that can be shown. And even from the small little ones, the other thing, like I'm in the Macedon Ranges, and a lot of sort of what's different about this region is a lot of the, there's plenty of celladors, but a lot of the celladors, when you go there, you'll most likely meet the owner or the winemaker. So it's a bit of a different experience, and that's a bit of a unique selling point for this region in terms of, being able to meet the maker. So every region is quite different, and that's what I was meaning. It doesn't matter if you're a large player or a small player. There's still a lot that you can do with video as well.
Well, the thing that I was thinking as I was touring the location, so I had 2.5 days, went to some big, some small, is that we've had all of the discussion around how Napa has become so expensive. And I'm going to use the word contrived. I think that there are a lot of Napa experiences that are at this point so very scripted and planned out. And here I am, an hour outside of Melbourne, absolutely the helicopters everywhere. And from an American spending standpoint, the dollar is strong with English speaking, which means it's very easy for them. I was just looking at it and thinking, this is, especially if they can fly in and they don't have to drive on the opposite side of the road. This seems to me like such an under-tapped market for international wine tourism.
It's probably, well, it's a little bit different at the minute, sort of post-COVID, and the Asian market in particular is really big for international tourism with Australian wines, but it sort of probably hasn't quite bounced back yet. So no doubt, but absolutely, I totally agree. But we definitely, there's more room and opportunity for the US. I always think, having lived there, I don't think you got the US, they get enough holidays. They only get 10 days a year.
I know, right? They get 10 days and they're lucky if they can take that. So this is why we have the boomers, because we have to wait for them to retire to actually get on the cruise ship and end up wherever we are, which is very, very unfortunate. But yeah, the other thing that I loved about it, just going to kind of sing some praises as a expat Antipodean, is the total lack of pretense. Like we've got winemakers who are so skilled, have made wine all over the world, and are just as genuine and as welcoming as they can possibly be. I actually think it's something that New Zealand does remarkably well. Also, so for me, that was really lovely. All right. So moving forward, we heard all the discussion about challenges, innovation, where we're going. With 20 years behind you in the wine industry, what do you think are the opportunities for Australia and, to a larger extent, Australasia going forward?
I do. It is an interesting time, and having been in the industry for so long, I have seen different cycles before. So, the whole China situation is not great at all. But we have had our tails between our legs, many years ago as well, in terms of the cycles that happen in the industry and then sort of go up. And I'm sort of keeping my fingers crossed a little bit about China, but maybe I'm being a bit too hopeful there. Look, I think opportunities are obvious. Opportunities are other export markets, but alternative, other options going on in Asia, whether it's South Korea, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Japan. People talk a little bit about India, but there still seems to be a few different challenges there. But sort of watch this space. And the US, obviously, there's always the UK and the US, but the US in particular, we have a higher average price point in the US. Our overall, we're sort of probably still got a bit of lingering, sort of mentality about it with the UK about price points. Although I did do a bit of work earlier in the year with Richard Siddle in the UK, and we did a whole buyers report there and had a lot of buyers, and we were particularly focused on Victoria, and they were saying it is a bit, and I love the word tipping point, but a bit of a tipping point at the moment. And, you don't sort of think of these opportunities, but because there's a lot of logistics and shipping issues going on around the world. So they were telling me that a lot of buyers in the UK, for instance, well, they're in the mindset, if I've got to wait 6 weeks for a product to come from Europe, I may as well get it from Australia or Victoria, and I'm going to get better return on investment. I'll get more bang for my buck, sort of thing, which was great to hear. And they were talking about certainly that they'd felt that there was a bit of a tipping point in terms of discovering new parts of Australia, and and even like with Victorian wines, how diverse, and hopefully you saw a bit of that, how diverse Victoria can be in terms of we do, we were at Shandong, we do sparkling really well all the way through to your stickies and your fortified wines. Victoria does really have quite a mix of cool climate, wines through to warmer continental sort of climate. So we're kind of quite unique in the space in Australia in terms of our diversity there, which is great. But I think as well, being able to really probably hone in on and get a bit more pointed in terms of your own direct to consumer for a lot of wineries, and putting a lot more focus on that, obviously, again, because it's the highest margin. So whether it's through the cellar door, whether it's online sales and what you do in that space, is probably some opportunities. Not to mention too, then, quite a growth in no low, the no and low alcohol, which may freak some people out, but you look at like pretty amazing statistics of what Geeson's doing in New Zealand, so it's not damaging their brand. What do you think about no low?
God, I'm super excited by it. And I think there's this weird thing where we tend to think of wine drinkers in this box, like a wine drinker is always a certain kind of wine drinker. And I can't tell you the number of nights that, I would absolutely go for something that's a no alc, because I want the ceremony and the ritual. I drink coffee to wake up in the morning, and then I'll normally have a glass of wine or a glass of sparkling at the end of the night. But that's just, especially with age, because I'm very open about that. I cannot drink the same way that I could when I was 25. And that, drinking a really nice preparation, and that's what's important, is that there is some experience, some service to it, right? For me, is an opportunity to round out my day, to kind of close out my day. I'm still going to be a wine lover. I'm still going to be a champagne lover. This is not a competition for my dollar. It's just a competition between literally like water or tea.
Yeah.
So a lot to be done. And the other thing that I just want to say about it is there's a lot to be done in terms of better using our resources. If we've got facilities that can put a kombucha under crown cap, in our bottling lines, those bottling lines are sitting there unused. Well, we need to be thinking about that.
It's a really good point. I have a friend here who was one of the first ones to make kefir here in Australia, and which is similar to kombucha, and she's done really, really well. But it's always really hard to maintain, if you're doing it as pure as possible, the alcohol, and for it then not to flip into being a product that has to be sold in a licensed venue. So a lot of challenges for them in that space. So you're right. If you actually go to a winemaker, they'll know how to sort of handle that a little bit. They've got the experience.
Yeah, and it's been a long time now, but I remember being pregnant and I still wanted something nice. Tanisha Townsend, who we interviewed after Wine Paris this year, she talked about it on the podcast, where she was saying that, it used to be that you would go, and if you wanted a non-alc, they'd bring it out to you basically in like a juice cup, right? Instead of now, where we understand, present it beautifully, make the experience of it. And when I look at the spaces with all of the young people and their parents and their grandparents and kids and the whole thing, it makes us at realistically very little additional cost. It makes us so much more responsive and resilient. So yeah, I don't understand why a brand wouldn't do it. Yeah, the other thing that just for me to have a little rant for a minute, because I'm getting on my soapbox right now, is non-alcs get us past they get us past all of our alcohol advertising issues, because of course it's really hard for us to go out in digital and market a bottle of wine. We've got great restrictions, and sometimes in America you can even have state by state or county by county restrictions. Whereas if you're advertising an experience and a no alc, I can advertise that anywhere.
No, totally. Well, and I'm not abreast of what's going on in other countries, but when I think it was this year, I can't remember, maybe it was last year, when I first saw no alcohol right at the price where you were paying at the cash registers at petrol stations, I was like, hold on, because I recognized the brand. But I'm like, but of course it was no alcohol. And that's only been a change here in Australia just recently. And it's quite unusual to see. And for me, I think the great thing about Nolo is obviously it is a trend that's going on. It's not about to take over or anything like that. But the most important thing is just what you said. People aren't deserting drinking alcohol. They're just they're just flexing up and down depending on the occasion that they've got in front of them, sort of thing. So, and another thing that got pointed out to me that I actually hadn't thought about, which I was a bit disappointed given I work in insights, but there is also a bit of a propensity of what's being seen that it actually can be a good way to get people into the category of drinking as well, younger consumers. Because sometimes, particularly with red and things like that, it's a bit of a struggle to make. It's quite challenging to make low and no alcohol red wine and still be as beautiful as your alcoholic version. And sometimes they can be a bit sort of, the taste profile is a little bit sort of milder, and it can be an opportunity to get people into the category, which is, that's great. We hear a lot about younger people deserting it.
Yeah, was it Angus Hewson who said in his presentation that actually the research showed that the average consumer can't identify the difference? So again, that notion of we are not our audience, we're like, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out and produce mediocre, no and low alc wine. But again, just perhaps the qualitative and quantitative research is going to be really valuable for us to understand if this is more viable than maybe we think it is. The other thing that I'm going to say about it is brand loyalty. Brand loyalty matters. If I've got a brand that I love and they're giving me an opportunity to support them by purchasing a no alc or a no alc mixer that I can then control the amount of alcohol that's in it, that's great for me because it means that I'm still able to give a brand that I like my money. I can top up cases if I'm purchasing online. Like there are a lot of benefits to it. You and I could do a whole hour just talking about no.
No, I totally agree because it's like, a lot of insights work that I've done, often quite powerful brands. And I mean, many brands do have this, but not everyone, but, gives the opportunity. We're not talking about Nolo at the minute, but give the opportunity with their different price points to be able to, consumers, identify with the brand, they love it, and then they trust it because they can be a bit fearful, and they can then go up and down based on the price point and the occasion that they're doing. So that's a really, really good point about adding in Nolo because that's part of your whole repertoire. And I'm sure, that New Zealand brand that I mentioned before, but Gießen, I think they've been quite innovative in general across the board, that brand. So it's really it's really interesting to see. And I've heard, it's really interesting to see what they're doing in that space.
So we've got Nolo. A kind of last question in terms of the insights that are coming across your desk. Is there anything beyond Nolo that's really exciting you in the next couple of years?
Look, probably for me, it's product innovation formats, and really because, like we're talking about, that we're all not regular wine consumers. I obviously am highly immersed in insights and things. So again, it's probably a bit of the really interesting area. And I think in general, what we're experiencing right now, I'm not talking about the China thing, but I'm talking about, Nolo, product innovations, even hybrid drinks and all of that. Is we're kind of in the middle of the most innovative period we've ever been, I think, really, with wine and particularly with beverages in general, certainly from the entire period that I've worked in this space. And it's probably we've been pushed into it a bit by the massive growth of craft spirits and craft beers and hybrid drinks and RTDs and seltzers and things like that. Like we've probably been pushed into it a little bit by that. And so, canned wines, that just increases the opportunity for people to drink wine because you hear all the time, they're at a massive event like a concert or things like that where there can't be glass. So, yes, you can still have wine because it's in a can. So opportunities when wine wouldn't have been okay. Or you hear a lot about young consumers, and again, this is not you or I, but they see buying a whole bottle of wine as quite a big investment, as in, what if I spend $25 and I don't like it? Whereas I think you and I don't think like that, haven't thought like that for a long time. But so again, having smaller size formats, different, opportunities to try the wine gives, it creates new opportunities for a whole host of new consumers as well, which is great.
Do you think that more expensive or premium brands can ever jump that hurdle to make it happen? Because I think that's the problem is everybody's concerned, right, that what we've got going into cans, and we always laugh about this, it's not that canned wine's bad, it's that shitty canned wine is bad, right?
Yeah.
I've only seen a handful of examples. Tallis Creek did their bag and box. I think it was a 3-liter, and that sold out within hours. And then in June of 2020, and I only remember that date because it was right after COVID started. Otherwise, I'm crap at dates. June of 2020, a brand in the UK released what they called the Bagnums, which are 1.5 pouches of good quality French wine. So, but I can't think of instances where, high quality, well known for quality brands are willing to embrace it.
It's a good point, and I don't know if I have the answer. However, it's a bit like screw cap. I think, it's a bit like, there was a period in time when, and I certainly know in the US, screw cap is nowhere near as, pronounced as what it is here, and we're just used to it. We're used to now having, $80 wines with screw cap. But there was certainly a period where it was only the lesser expensive wines that were in screw cap, and you wouldn't dare put your more expensive wines under screw cap. But we've sort of that has changed as, sort of consumer adoption and, sort of understanding of it has as well. Do you think? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I've broken many a knitting needle trying to get a cork out of a bottle because I didn't have a corkscrew. And it's funny, there's this joke around, I don't know what men talk about, but women in wine, we've all had the conversation about various tools that we carry around in our handbags or our makeup bags that we've used to try to get a cork out. Apparently a mascara tube works really, really well. But from a straight up customer experience standpoint, yeah, I love our screw caps. I realize how Kiwi I am in saying that. I do think that it's just going to take some ballsy brands. So maybe that is Tallis Creek with their bag and box to say, look, we're looking at this from the customer experience. And I suppose the thing I harp on this, I feel like every podcast, is that also just someone sharing their data, someone coming out with the examples. I mean, Jason at Tallis has been really good about saying, I think it's on Twitter and on his blog, how quickly those sold. But for the most part, we don't get a lot of information on the success or viability of these experiments. Yeah, that's something that I would love to see is just, brands saying we did this and our people loved it, or we did something and it completely fucking crashed and burned. But that's good for all of us to know.
Absolutely.
I would love to see the bag and box become more viable for good wines, because I think it's a great way to drink, control portion sizes, control temperature, because we can pop it in the fridge, whatever. So that's something that I'm excited about. God willing, it happens.
And it also, the proportion of people living on their own is massive. I don't know. It's like, I can't, the number of households in Australia that are single occupied is massive. And I have done a lot of cask research before and for clients, and it always fascinates me because, and often the insights are back like, don't treat us like we're different types of consumers. We are wine drinkers, and don't make me do the walk of shame and go to the end all the way through the store to get to where I'm going. I just because it's, and a lot of the time it might be, I just want 1 or 2 glasses and I want it in the fridge and I want it to be, so there, that behavior, should apply to, good quality wines as well.
Word. I agree with you entirely. But I'm so grateful for your time. I know it's a little bit hard to pull together. You have been in the middle of floods as well. So thank you, Steph. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure. Great to catch up with you, Polly. Thanks very much.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening, and a great big thank you to Steph for joining me today. The Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world, and the only one with daily episodes. Tune in each day and discover all our different shows. Be sure to join us next Sunday for another look at the world of wine marketing.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, brought to you by the Wine to Wine Business Forum 2022. This year will mark the 9th edition of the forum, to be held on November 7th and 8th, 2022, in Verona, Italy. Remember, tickets are on sale now, so for more information, please visit us at winetowine.net. guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.